I need to start off by saying just a word about the last few weeks where Paul Adams and I have been a tag team teaching this class online or whatever you call it. He and I make a pretty good team. I've boasted for years about how Darvin Keck and I could work a class or a church down to manageable size in a hurry. But I need to say that Paul and I are way better than Darvin and I were. We've shut down not only the Edmond Church of Christ, but every church in the country. So I understand now that we're in the last 2 rounds of this tag team deal, that we're going to turn it over to some elders and a bunch of rookies. And y'all have got a big job ahead of you to match me and Paul, so just have at it. Okay, that took care of that. Paul, it's a lot of fun being in a tag team. And they won't let us both go down to Jimmy's Grill and eat the same day because we'd set the Church of Christ back too many years if the place blew up or something. So anyway, we're about done. The assignment for this quarter is the expression, but God. And the point is that human beings, we've got our thing going and we've got our agendas and all that. But God has his way, and that's how things are going to be. And so it's our job to find that out and adjust to that. And my job today is to talk about, but God sees the heart. I'm going to tell this story to start off. When I was a little boy, the country church where we went with my extended family was small and a country church. And the song leader, as I think back on it, I'm pretty sure he had emphysema. But one of the songs that he liked to sing was, "There's an all-seeing eye watching you." And this was before I could read, but I'm real interested in what's going on. So they'd be singing along, and there was a place in the text where it said, "Every day mind the course you pursue." And as they were singing that, I couldn't tell what they were saying. It sounded to me like it was, "Every day mind the course, pursue." So what in the world is pursue? But they said, not only in that song, but in various things in the messages in the church, that God sees and knows everything. He knows every thought, every intent, every feeling about us, all of us at once. And I need to say that was an amazing thing for me. It's an amazing thing for me now. A little bit scary, but that's kind of where we are today with our story. We all basically know the story of David and his kingship. So we're going to talk just a minute about how that came about. His dad was Jesse, and he had 8 sons, 7 older, and then the youngest was David. Saul was the king, and he was a big, tall, good-looking man and Looney Tunes. And by now, he has disqualified himself, and his reign is just about over. So God has Samuel, the prophet, who had a real reputation, go down to Jesse's house to pick out a new king. When Samuel went down there, it stirred up a weasel in the chicken house, scared everybody to death, because they knew when he came, that usually meant there was going to be trouble. But this time, no. So he looked at each son as they came by. They were tall and good-looking, handsome people, evidently. Jesse was a very successful producer of sons. And the prophet would think, well, okay, this is him. And no, this is not him. Yeah, he looks good, but that's not who I want. And so finally they come to the last one. He's out looking after the sheep. He was young and couldn't fight back, so they had him out doing the work. Excuse me. And of course that was him. Said he was a ruddy child and had beautiful eyes. but he had a good heart. That was the main thing, is God could see that he had a good heart. So he's going to be the king. Now, he had a lot of stuff to go through before he got there, but that's how all that came about. So our message today, our lesson is, what about this God sees the heart business? Because in the world we live in, one of our main interests is privacy. We all kind of like to feel like we've got certain things that nobody else knows about us, even our marriage partners or our spouses, children, whoever, that we've got some privacy, and we go to great pains nationally to maintain that privacy. And there's certain kinds of situations where you can get yourself in a lot of trouble by breaking privacy if you reveal things that shouldn't be revealed. So, about this heart business. Very early in our life, we start to recognize that we carry on transactions with ourselves. What am I feeling? What matters a lot to me? And so we come to understand that the heart, as a metaphor, is about all of this inner stuff that's going on. And we also come to understand early that can get messed up. I recall from early times in my life the feeling, the understanding that how I was supposed to be wasn't always how it turned out. I'm thinking about one story in particular that haunts me yet. This was about the end of World War II when this happened. So I would have been 6, 7. My younger brother, Bobby, who is now dead, would have been 3 years younger than that. And we were in southeast Oklahoma visiting with grandparents that lived there, and my uncle, Fred. He took Bobby and me into town one afternoon and gave us a dime apiece to buy whatever we wanted at the little store there. One of the favorite things for us in those days, and not just us but kids, was Fleer's double bubble gum. They were round, chopped off pieces that were wrapped up in papers, and it was wonderful stuff. It tasted good and was a lot of fun to blow big bubbles, and we had all these contests, but it was hard to get. Whatever was in Fleer's double bubble was crucial for the war, so it's hard to get. Well, of course, they happened to have, they had just gotten in some at this little store. So I bought 10 pieces of Fleer's double bubble with my dime and tried to persuade Bobby to do the same. But he unwisely bought some kind of candy and promptly ate it against my judgment, and then entreated me to give him a part of my double bubble. I remember that hard feeling that I had of, where does he get off expecting to consume his stuff and mine too? No, I'm not going to. And I suspect that there may be a lot of that thought among us these days is, how dare you want what's mine? So I didn't give him any. I still remember looking in the car where he was sitting by me there in the front seat across, and seeing how he looked, that face when he realized that I was not going to give him any of my Fleer's double bubble. And you can tell that after all these years, I still remember that. I made up for it, and years later, I gave him a lot of different things. In fact, once I even gave him my golf clubs. He was trying to play golf at East Central and needed some good clubs, and I had some, so I gave them to him. What was the deal? I recognized that my heart was not quite right about things. That didn't quite wash, and that's kind of going to be our thinking today. What I'd like to do first is to get out of the way some of the troublesome factors that kind of bug us about this heart business for this reason. David, Abraham, Jacob, Moses, Solomon, the people that are held up as being God's guy. He's going to bless them. He's going to make a great nation out of them. He loves them because they got a good heart and all that. They're just jerks. When you start doing serious studying about their life, they just did awful stuff, the kind of stuff that would get you nowadays a great disapproval, maybe get you a divorce, maybe get you in jail, maybe get you killed. So when we study them, and it says about him that they were people after God's heart, it's kind of like, wait just a minute, there's something that I'm not quite getting a grip on here, and that's more troublesome because we understand that's also true about us, that no matter how good we try to be, we still wind up sometimes being jerks. And so then we ask this question as we think about that. These guys were successful. That's the thing that we get about them. They led the kingdom, or they did whatever it was they did and were highly successful and got their names in the Bible, for goodness sake. And they're held up as role models after all these years. So we ask this question that we don't much like to answer. Is it sometimes true that success obliterates wrongdoing? That you judge the person not by the work, but the work by the person? Well, I obviously don't have a good answer to that, but it's kind of reassuring too to recognize that they are considered okay. So I guess that might apply to us as well, if we're willing to accept it. Another aggravating thing that we've tried to work with over many years in philosophy, theology, psychology, medicine, is just what is a human being. One of my favorite stories is about René Descartes, famous French philosopher, who was thought of a lot in my graduate school work. For years, I was afraid some prof was going to call on me to stand up and explain what was called the Cartesian dichotomy. I didn't know what that was. Finally, it dawned on me after I got out, you know what I could do is I could read that book and find out about the Cartesian dichotomy. It was a very simple thing. He said that man is two parts, body and soul. Body and soul and body. And he thought that you can have a soul without having a body, a disembodied soul. Well, now we don't think that whatever you are, it's going to involve the brain. If you haven't got the brain, you haven't got anything. So there's a lot of problematic things about this heart business, and we're going to deal with that in just a second. One other thing about that, let's say that I do something that is embarrassing or humiliating or even criminal, and I'm trying to explain what was driving me at that moment to do that. I may say something like, well, that wasn't the real me. That my heart, whatever that is, was going another way, and I did something that was contradictory to that. Well, what we've recognized about ourselves is that we're different people inside the same skin. The famous psychologist B.F. Skinner called that response systems. So wherever we are, we're a certain way. The roles and the language that go with that particular position are different than they are somewhere else. When I'm teaching class, whether it be, say, a college class or a Bible class, I'm a different person than I am when I'm playing golf. I've got a different language, I look different, and I've had people tell me, I wasn't sure that I recognized you in those different places. Well, what we want it to be thought of about us, that even if we're not good in what people see about us, we have good hearts. So we ask this question: whether you're talking biblically, socially, or however else, what do we mean? What does the Bible mean when it talks about heart? When God said that David had a good heart, what does that mean? And when I say about somebody that's a good-hearted person, what does that mean? Let me say two or three things that we tend to make it mean, but it may not. First of all is feelings. We sing and we write poetry and we do movies about heart. You're my sweetheart. I carry you in my heart. You broke my heart. And that, of course, refers to feelings, that things are good or they're not. But that's not quite, David, sometimes he felt good things and sometimes he didn't. Is it intensity? That is, boy, that guy's got heart. When he goes after something, he goes after it full tilt. And I don't think it's that either. Because sometimes heartfelt things are gentle and easygoing and not intense. Is it intention? When I say, having done something that I shouldn't, that my heart was right, but my actions weren't, excuse me. Well, no, that can't be it. Let's see if we can say what we mean and what is meant biblically when they say heart. I'm going to put it like this. It is the totality of personality. It's hard to define what personality is, but it goes something like this. Personality is the sum total of everything you are. And we wonder how we come about getting that. Some of it we think we're born with, and some we get from our environment. But there are interesting things about this heart business. The one that captivated me greatly during school was Romans, when Paul talks about his contradictory nature. He says, I decide I'm going to do right, and then I don't. And I'm going to be a spiritual man, but then I be carnal. And he kind of bursts out at the end of chapter 7 in Romans, wretched man that I am, who can deliver me? He recognized that the heart has a great deal to do with our relationship to God, B, our relationship to other people, and C, the one we tend to think about most, is our relationship with ourselves. Sometimes we feel like there's a snow village loose in our brains, causing us to experience chaos. And we sort of think of ourselves as having heart trouble. In the counseling world, one of the things that I discovered pretty early as a young guy was that I wasn't having an awful lot of success doing marriage counseling with older people. That they had sort of lost empathy, the ability to feel and recognize how it is to be somebody else. I didn't have a whole lot of success doing all of that. And when things haven't gone well for us, we may speak of having a broken heart. So it's a capacity for pain and distress. Well, I think God's point with David and with all these other people that we've talked about, and with us, is that inner stuff matters greatly. Has the capacity for blessing, has the capacity for evil, So I guess we could say we have the real problem of heart trouble sometimes. Now then, we ask ourselves, so what does all that mean for us? We could be Boy Scouts or Reader's Digest people and kind of shallow and say, well, we want to do everything we can to have a good heart. So let me put it this way and try to avoid that if I can by saying specific things that we want to do and be. Our goal is to have and to be good hearts. So, how do we go about that? I've listed a few things here that I want to talk about a while. First, obviously, and most important, is that we need to note and acknowledge God's interest in that. When you think about God of the universe and a shepherd boy out, I'm pretty sure they had him out tending the sheep because they were all older and could bully him around, that the God of the universe would have in his thinking, consciousness, whatever that is about God, we understand that it's not quite like us. The ratio of it is kind of unequal. The God of the universe interested in what this shepherd boy is out doing. He was very interested in it. It is at the same time flattering and a little bit scary to think, which I did as a boy, that God is seeing every thought, every intention, every feeling, every impulse. But after all, we understand that as Christians. And because we are monotheists, we understand that God is omniscient, sees and knows everything. One interesting thing about that from the perspective of my work was that I knew lots of things that might prove useful or troublesome to the people with whom I worked. Let me do just one case. This couple, these were not Quail Springs people. That came from another church. Somebody had sent them to see me for marital counseling. The guy didn't want to be there, and he made that perfectly clear as we got started. And the woman was having trouble not crying, not just sobbing. She did want to be there because she was desperately wanting to save a marriage. So we did all of our preliminary stuff, got acquainted, and then I had them tell me their story. We had set aside 2 hours, so we had plenty of time for telling the whole story. And the story was that he wasn't sure he wanted to stay married. He would go away for a while and then he would come back. He wasn't having an affair. He wasn't doing anything criminal or like that. But he wasn't sure he wanted to be married, but he thought maybe he did. And he was a little bit on the sullen side about the whole thing, doing it kind of against his better judgment and his will. Well, after we had talked about 30 minutes, it was perfectly clear to me what the deal was. So I said to him, and I said this kindly, I know what the deal is. You know what the deal is. She doesn't know what the deal is. Let's tell her so that we're all on the same page and then see what we can work out. He gave me a brusque, almost hateful reply. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you want to tell her, but tell her whatever you want to tell her. I said, you don't want to be the one to tell her? No, I want you to. It's okay. Your husband is having an affair. He is exhibiting every sign that somebody exhibits when they are having an affair and are feeling somewhat guilty but defiant about it. She looked at me. He was sitting there like the great stone sphinx. And then she really cried and wanted to know what she had done to cause it. Well, that wasn't what had caused it. That's not what causes affairs. It's something that's going on at home. And I don't know that I've ever seen, excuse me, a woman cry harder than that. I knew that he was having the affair because I had perceptual capacities through experience. When you think that God understands every single thing that can be known, it's a little bit overwhelming. Having said all that, how to be and have good hearts. Let's go through a little catalog. I guess we ought to start with the golden rule. I'm sure that if you have studied any other world religion besides Christianity, you know that virtually all of them have the golden rule in them in one form or another. In the simplest language, what you want, why do others the same way? Jesus put that extremely well, what you would have other men do unto you. When we think of people who are considerate, generous, kind, permissive, warm, friendly, empathic, that makes us feel good. We love that and we want that. And it's a very simple thing to just turn that around and say, okay, get at it. One curious thing to me in the counseling that I did over the years when I was practicing was that people who were not like that didn't know it. They often did not know that they appeared to be unkind, cold, detached, mean, harsh. They usually said something like, well, I was just trying to be honest, and all of that. But we'll start off with that golden rule. It's a marvelous formula for being thought of as having and being a good heart. Practicing self-knowledge. Back when I was at that church where they were singing, "There's an all-seeing eye watching you," I was carrying on an inner transaction with myself. I was thinking about the song leader, and I was a little tickled because he was a smoker, had a real red face, and had trouble singing high, and coughed and snorted when he was leading the singing, and it was all I could do to keep from dying laughing. And I was thinking to myself about myself, hey, you're supposed to be paying attention. You're not supposed to be thinking that kind of stuff. You can practice these self-transactions, or you can just ignore them. You can just not be particularly self-conscious. There's one study in my discipline that made a big impression on me. That when I was in graduate school, the most famous person in the field of psychology was named Carl R. Rogers. He was the one who said that you don't tell somebody what to do, you let them figure it out themselves, but you accept them as they work on that. He and some of his graduate students were going to do a study about juvenile delinquency. What were the factors in juvenile delinquency versus appropriate behavior? They had several hundred people that were involved, At the end of their survey, they had a space for one more question that they really didn't need, but they went ahead and put in a question anyway, just because they had space for it. The question was about self-knowledge. Thinking that we won't learn anything from that, but we'll just put it in. The first time they did the study, the main factor in whether a child was likely to become a juvenile delinquent was how well did they understand themselves. Rogers was pretty sure that was wrong, that was something inappropriate about the results. So they did the study again. And that time they focused on that, got the same answer. A major element in self-control and being or having a good heart is self-knowledge. And of course, there's the Oriental expression, know thyself. So you practice that. You may actually take time when you focus on that. In my business, one of the things we were taught was, if you're in the middle of a counseling session and you find that you're having powerful feelings, pause and go out and take however long it takes for you to figure out what it is you're feeling and why. My memory is that I only had to do that twice. I thought, wait a minute, something's carrying me off here. I need to go out and think it over and see if I can handle this or if we need to quit. So practice self-knowledge. Practice self-forgiveness. I really do know why those jerks, Abraham, Jacob, David, Solomon, why they were held out and put in the Bible as role models. It wasn't about how good they were. It was whose they were and what happened to them. They got forgiven for those peccadillos, those things that people oughtn't to be doing, and they did them anyway. That story of David and that woman, Bathsheba, and having her husband killed, that broke almost every kind of law there is to break. The lawyers tell me that one of the things that the courts take the most seriously is when you scheme, when you make plans to do bad stuff. And he did that and did it, and it was just awful, and lied about it. When the prophet came and said, "You're the man," it broke him. And then God really broke him, if we understand the Old Testament. He wasn't struck dead, his baby was struck dead. That was far worse for him than if he had been struck dead himself. So, forgiveness of self. Just from a little humorous standpoint, back in my single days when I was a young preacher about 100 years ago, had a romance going with a young woman, liked her a lot, and I think she liked me a lot. She hated that I was a preacher. Really didn't want any involvement in that. She was a very trim, attractive girl. When she came home from college and we went out on a date, she would talk about what she'd been doing. But once in a while she was at home, she would eat more than she really thought she should, and she might gain a pound or two, and nobody knew but her. And I don't know how she knew, but anyway, she did. You should have heard what she called herself. She said the most awful things to herself about that eating that she didn't think she ought to be doing. It was like she was the worst person that ever lived. Self-loathing or self-hatred. We have all kinds of reasons to be down on ourselves and angry at ourselves. But it's all right for us to forgive ourselves. if God is willing to forgive us, I guess we ought to be able to forgive ourselves. That'll lead to a better heart. That'll lead to a heart that's softer and more benign for everyone around. Self-soothing, we call it in my business. You think about that, you know what that is without me using words particularly about it. It means to calm yourself, to tell yourself things that matter about whatever the subject is at the moment, to reassure yourself, to pause, to meditate, and all of those things. Obviously, in the counseling room, we do lots of that. Somebody is so aroused and so upset that they almost can't function or can't function at all. And what is needed is a calming, pausing, self-soothing. As we bow before God, worship acknowledges that I'm not in charge, which is a great relief. There are problems that are just too hard. And when we recognize and admit to God that I'm not adequate for that, oh, what a relief. Self-soothing. In the words of my neighbor, the lawyer, don't eat fig Newtons. We go on a lot of trips together, done lots of different kinds of things together, including trips to England and Scotland. And we've been in lots of situations where eating happens. In this class, we have some great situations with eating where Jerry catches all those fish and cooks them, and we have the big fish fry, and that's a marvelous event. And we have people who show up for that never show up for anything else. That's okay. We're glad to have them. Tickle for them to come. My friend said he caught himself one day eating fig Newtons just because they were there. Fig Newtons are some people's favorite cookie, not his and not mine. He said, I was eating that just because it was there, and why would I do that? I have access to anything that I want to eat of any kind. So why would I eat something dull and boring and a waste of time and a waste of my energy? He said, I'm going to eat no more fig Newtons. As a way to live, that's a good thought. Life is the most valuable commodity we've got, and we don't want to waste it. There are things to be done that we ought to do. Some of them, duty, and we may have a little time of unpleasantness and duty, but most of the time not. But there are so many other kinds of things, so we don't want to waste our energy or our hard investment eating fig Newtons. Don't eat fig Newtons. And finally, you thought I was never going to get through, didn't you? Practice what you preach. In my seminars that I did about child socialization, I talked some about that, where parents get up and on Sunday morning and clean kids up and take them to Sunday school. They drive up to the curb and drop them off and drive away, and they want the child to be a church person. And when that fails, they wonder why it failed. And the answer is because they didn't practice what they preached. And when we see a person who professes one thing and does something else, all it does is just aggravate us. That doesn't persuade us of anything except this is not a very authentic person. To be slightly more technical about that, we like to use the term congruence. Every human being has regular behaviors that they do, a behavior system, there are things that you can bank on about me. The one that I use as an example all the time is making jokes. Every January 1st, I decide this year I'm not going to be a big joker. But by noon, I violated that one. A behavior system. And then we have thought systems, how we traditionally think about things. My wife and children will tell you that if you want to hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just ask me a question. And that's how I go about it. What is very important for peace and security and mental well-being is that your behavior systems and your thought systems be congruent. They need to roughly overlap so that there is not conflict between them. So that we have to change sometimes our thinking, sometimes we change our actions so that we're getting the right mix. Well, there you have it. Paul, if you're listening to this, well, thanks for being a good tag team partner. To the class, let me say on behalf of me and Judy, we're missing you all. We're ready for this to start back up. And since Paul and I are retiring, well, I suppose the churches will all probably do that. Let's close with just a moment of prayer. God bless our country. Bless us in it. Bless our church. Bless us by letting us be back together. Bless us continually by letting us be your servants. In Jesus' name, amen.